A city of dreams. Incredible architecture. A massive navy. Atlantis is thought to be one of the most advanced societies of the ancient world. Then, without warning, it literally vanishes overnight. An extraordinary civilization, lost forever. But its memory is not soon forgotten. Legendary status has made Atlantis the holy grail of modern archaeology.
Escúchame, el corte que tiene la estructura es humano.
The city may not necessarily be under the bottom of the sea, but rather under the bottom of this flatland.
Atlantis should be somewhere around here. But where? And if it is here, how come we can't see it?
This team of obsessed scientists believe they finally hit the jackpot. The extraordinary tale of Atlantis reaches back to the very dawn of Western civilization.
This city of Atlantis is seen by many as the mother of Egypt and Mesopotamia and Israel and Europe and all the other civilizations that began in this area. And if it began here, we may be looking at the single most important site for humanity.
The discovery of Atlantis would completely rewrite the early chapters of history. Myth would become reality. So finding this mysterious sunken city has become the stuff of obsession. Generation after generation has set out in search of her, but every quest has ended in failure. Now, with the help of modern technology, one team may finally beat the odds. They're employing everything from satellite photography to ground-penetrating radar to underwater archaeology in a passionate bid to find the sunken city. But does Atlantis even exist? The legendary city may be just that, a legend. Over millennia, the story of the ancient city has taken on a life of its own, transformed into countless fantasy lands. To separate fact from fiction, any search for Atlantis must begin with the original source material, and Angela Hobbs knows just where to look.
All we know about Atlantis comes from a few pages of the book that I'm holding in my hands, written by the Greek philosopher Plato. He is the gold standard. There is no other ancient source for the myth of Atlantis. This is it. The records speak of a vast power that sprang forth from beyond, from the Atlantic Ocean. For at that time, this ocean was passable, since it had an island in it in front of the strait that you people say you call the Pillars of Heracles.
Plato's descriptions of Atlantis are incredibly intricate. His writings provide any Atlantis seeker a detailed roadmap. According to Plato, Atlantis was an island kingdom with land rings and circular harbors, situated just beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Many believe that the Pillars of Hercules describe the peaks that flank the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar. The northern pillar being the Rock of Gibraltar, and the southern pillar a corresponding peak in North Africa. This leads Dr. Richard Freund to begin his search for Atlantis in southern Spain.
The Pillars of Hercules was known by every single ancient writer as being located in what we call today the Straits of Gibraltar. This bay is located just beyond those ancient Pillars of Hercules.
Freund focuses on the Guadalquivir River Delta in Doñana National Park. He believes a massive ancient bay once existed here in antiquity.
Here we are in the largest marsh in southern Spain, hundreds of square miles. It is massive. We're talking about 40, 50 miles worth of just marsh. And archaeologists think that buried in this marsh is the lost city of Atlantis.
In 1922, archaeologists George Bonser and Adolf Schulten proposed that Atlantis is hidden under these mudflats. But for decades, most scholars ignore the theory. Then, in 2004, a young German physicist named Rainer Kuhn makes headlines using satellite photography to resurrect the Bonser-Schulten theory.
I am here within the mudflats of the Doñana National Park. It is exactly here where I think that Plato's Atlantis was located.
Kuhn observes strange circular patterns in a satellite photograph of the Doñana mudflats. Comparing the photograph to the detailed descriptions in Plato, Kuhn becomes convinced that the lost city is here in southern Spain. In his writings, Plato describes a port city with 3 rings of concentric harbors and gives exact dimensions for each. Kuhn believes that the circular patterns he sees fit Plato's measurements. And there's more. In his writings, Plato describes 2 temples on the center island of Atlantis. One dedicated to the god Poseidon. Within the circular patterns on the Doñana mudflats, Kuhn finds a rectangular anomaly. When he calculates its dimensions, it comes up a perfect match to Plato's description of Poseidon's temple. Today, Kuhn's theory has led to a full-scale expedition. A team will determine whether the anomalies detected from space actually correspond to man-made structures under the mud. It includes anthropologist Juan Villarias, whose research is closely followed by Richard Freund, and Paul Baumann, an expert in subsoil sonar mapping.
Those shapes certainly do not correlate with any possible geological feature. In my mind, there's no question they're man-made features.
One of the big circles is connected with several rectangular structures. We think that those rectangular structures have a wall below the shape in the soil. And we are trying to find if we have a building.
If there is a building, or any other artifact deep beneath this mud, it could be the find of a lifetime.
If they can excavate and come up with just a few really good artifacts that can be dated to 4,000 years ago, then we have evidence for one of the great myths in civilization, the myth of the beginnings of Atlantis.
Even on this team, there are skeptics who say the long-lost kingdom of Atlantis is just a myth. But they need only look 1,000 miles east to a place the Turkish call Troya for proof that myth can become reality. Here lies Troy, one of the most storied cities of the ancient world.
So, this is the main street of the late Bronze Age citadel of Troia, dated around the 13th century BC.
For years, people thought that the city of Troy was a fantasy, a made-up place described in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. In the 3,000-year-old story, Troy is the setting for the Trojan War and the legendary Trojan horse, where the warrior Achilles fights for the beautiful daughter of Zeus, Helen of Troy. Like Atlantis, Troy was thought to be just a myth. Those who searched for it were ridiculed.
There were many voices that would say that this story is pure fiction, that Troy does not exist.
Then, in 1870, amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann proves that Troy is a real place after all. He's able to unearth the fabled city by simply reading one of the oldest myths in Western literature as if it was fact.
He used the Iliad as a tour guide. He accepted it as a direct description.
Homer describes a city with steep rising walls and broad streets. Schliemann found them. The ruins here reveal a city filled with impressive architecture. Schliemann also needed to locate a city beside two rivers.
Troy is described as a city located at the conflow of two rivers, Scamandros and Simois, which are here.
Most importantly, he needed to find evidence of the Trojan War. And indeed, the archaeology here points to a bloody battle.
This building was roofed with wooden beams, and we know that it ended in a fire because the beams were charred. And if there was a Trojan War, this is the best evidence that we have.
For those searching for Atlantis, Troy is an inspiration, proving that myth and fact are sometimes one and the same.
When Schliemann came here, he was successful. He excavated an archaeological site that everybody agrees nowadays is the site of Troia. He wanted to solve an archaeological problem, and he did.
Now, the team in Spain is taking an even bigger gamble, and no one knows if they'll be as lucky. This rich and strange marshland on the Spanish coast is part of a protected park called Doñana. In ancient times, this area of southern Spain was underwater, and the Doñana Park was essentially a large bay.
In the bay, they were created over a long period of time massive sandbars that allowed people to use these sandbars to create cities.
Dr. Richard Freund believes that the famous rings of Atlantis may have existed in this bay thousands of years ago. Freund and a team of archaeologists, geologists, and anthropologists pore over satellite photos of the area.
We have put different depths.
They find what may be circular shadows of an ancient city.
Finally, we've narrowed it down to a very specific location around this mysterious circle in the midst of the swamp.
But in order to pick the best areas to investigate, the team needs better images. And a simple homemade contraption might just fit the bill. By attaching small cameras to a balloon and a kite, the team can get higher resolution images than the photographs taken from space.
Yeah, there we go, so that's working.
The aerial photographs we're doing today can give us the clearest images that they've ever had. Today we'll get the best photographs of this entire area with this balloon and see whether those rings really exist.
We're going to lift the balloon to at least 100 meters, and then we'll probably work at different increments of elevation, 100, 150, 200, and so forth.
Any patterns or anomalies in the soil that appear in these new photographs could indicate buried man-made structures. But if there was once a mighty city here, what happened to it? According to Plato's final chapter, the great city of Atlantis faced a cataclysmic disaster. Violent earthquakes are followed by great flooding. And after just one day and one night, the entire island of Atlantis sinks below the sea. In order to prove their theory, the Spanish team must find evidence of such a disaster. Dr. Juan Antonio Morales finds geological evidence of a long history of massive tsunamis hitting this coastline.
Puede observarse en esta zona como el desplazamiento de algunas de estas rocas a lo largo de esta plataforma tiene decenas, incluso centenas de metros. Por lo tanto, esto sugiere el desplazamiento no a causa de un solo tsunami, sino a causa de tsunamis sucesivos.